Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our African Creative Tech webinar series dedicated to the dynamic African creative economy ecosystem and its enablers, where we intend to blend creativity, technology, and venture capital, the three pillars of creative tech. I'm Denis Belkovich, the co-founder and general partner at Fuel Arts, and my co-host is Oluneye Oluvole. Hi, Olu, over to you.
Thank you, Dennis. And it's always a delight co-hosting the webinar series for this innovative vision with you. Good morning, everyone. I couldn't be more excited to welcome you to today's highly anticipated session of the Africa Creative Tech webinar series. And as a quick introduction, and before we get started, I am Oluneye Oluwole, the founder of Story Chess Group Canada. I'm an author, enterprise specialist, also keynote speaker, storyteller, and a spoken word poet. Dennis, I know it's going to be an interesting series today, and over to you to get us started.
Thank you, Olu. As always, it will be an interesting series. Thanks to our guests and thanks to the dynamic African creative tech ecosystem. So today we're excited to continue that story, the storytelling of the African creative tech webinar series. Over the next 2 months, you'll have the opportunity to learn more about Africa through its entrepreneurs, investors, representatives of government. So also you can watch the previous streams on our YouTube channel. This series is made possible thanks to the partnership between Fuel Arts and Story Chest. Together we have recently announced the Africa Creative Tech Initiative, committed to refining educational approaches, integrating innovative business models, and exploring wealth of initiatives designed to foster growth and innovation of African creative tech. So as we mentioned earlier, creative tech thrives at the intersection of three worlds: creativity, technology, and venture capital. Simply put, venture capital is essential to driving the creative industry forward, empowering its leaders, creating success stories, not only creating, but sharing success stories, making in general the sector more attractive to new investors, to the newcomers, to the industry. So today we're excited to continue our series with a VC expert who is both experienced and passionate about Africa's tech startup ecosystem and investment.
Yeah.
Olu?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Dennis, for that brilliant intro for us. As you all know, as a passionate storyteller, as an author, as a poet, it's an absolute delight for me and for Dennis as well to introduce and welcome to the house today a visionary whose passion for Africa is both visionary and transformative. Our guest today is no other than Stephen Freidmutter, a dedicated investor, advisor. He's a mentor. And above all, he's a champion of the emerging African startup tech ecosystem and its ambitious youth driven leaders. He is a limited partner at Launch Africa Ventures, and he's a storyteller. His work is reshaping Africa's investment landscape in the most inspiring way, with a portfolio that spans 125 startups across 30 African countries. His impact on the continent is undeniable. But before diving into his transformative work in Africa, I want to tell you that Stephen spent 3 years as a visiting entrepreneur at Cornell University at Ithaca, New York, where he turned groundbreaking ideas, patents, intellectual property, and inventions into real world solutions, companies, and most importantly, jobs. This alone highlights his knack for turning potential into tangible success. He also frequently speaks at key industry events worldwide, acting as a crucial bridge between global investors and Africa's brightest and youngest innovators. Today's conversation is not just about investment, it's about reframing Africa's narrative as a thriving hub of entrepreneurship, of innovation, and cultural leadership. So get ready for an engaging, thought provoking, and inspiring dialogue as we dive into the realities, the myths, and of course, the opportunities of investing in Africa. It's an honor to welcome Stephen Freidmutter. Stephen?
Thank you, Olu. Such a nice introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. So we're going to kick off of the questions today, and my first question is going to border on harnessing founders' stories for growth. As a founder, you're an investor. I know you have your story, so I'm going to bring your story. I want you to bring your story into this question. What role do the personal stories and experiences of African startup founders play in inspiring resilience and innovation? It's a double barrel question, actually. And the second is, how can these narratives be harnessed to drive investment and attract global interest in Africa's creative tech ecosystem? Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, so I have a couple of different ways to answer it, but basically, sometimes I think people think that the way us investors do it is by just looking at charts and numbers and stuff like that. But in reality, in Africa, where the opportunity is outsized and the risk is outsized, it's people's stories that become the number one factor for who I choose to get behind. So, for instance, there are so many, unlike the US and Europe and Canada, the companies in Africa are really solving everyday problems that people have that could really change their lives. Whereas in the US, let's say, which I'm more familiar with, people are inventing the fifth version of something that's more efficient, maybe. But in Africa, it's like, you mean nobody's done that before? So in that way, there's an unlimited amount of ideas that are valid. So it's really about the people and their stories. And so both the way I perceive them and then us being together, it's really the way I mentor them so they could perceive in the bigger marketplace.
Thank you, Olu, for your brilliant question. Thank you, Stephen.
Sorry, I just
sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can follow up. If you like.
Question.
I have a follow-up question to my first question. Sorry, Dennis. I want you to situate your story of how you got into backing African entrepreneurs. You have a brilliant story that I want you to share with our audience. How did you get into that space, and what brought about that story? That story is really super interesting for us.
That's a great question, because telling my story tells the story of what we're doing in Africa. So when I finished my 3 years at Cornell, as a child of immigrants, I'll start there. Okay. As a child of immigrants, I realized that my place in the world was to support people that don't get support from the system, from whether it be Wall Street, Silicon Valley, governments, whatever. So I started out as an investor in female-founded companies, and through those investments, being a male, as one of the first female, I've always been somebody who is on the forefront of doing things. So here is this new thought of this is like, almost 10 years ago, this new thought of investing specifically in female founders or African founders, or, somebody who doesn't get their share of the investment money. And so through doing that, one of the groups I met was from Africa. And then it morphed into supporting all underrepresented founders, if we put that, which would be females, Latino, Black, gay, whatever, all kinds of groups. But when I met the group from Africa, I just sort of was taken away, and their story was the one that stood out to me. And through that, like you could say, the rest is history. I became one of the first investors in this African company that was actually in the arts. It is in the arts and entertainment space. And then had African investors follow me in to do this. Now, that's an interesting thing, that often even wealthy Africans need somebody like me to validate the investment for them to invest in Africa in their own countries, which has been an interesting, unexpected takeaway.
Great. Although I should say that your additional question couldn't be better, because it's all about storytelling. Thank you, Stephen, for your honest reply. And now our listeners and viewers understand why we made the subtitle of our webinar, like where storytelling meets numbers, investing, where storytelling meets numbers, because in order to enter to feel successful, you have to rely on numbers. But to enter the market, you need to rely on the story. And thank you, Stephen, for sharing your story with the world, and for showing example for local African investors.
In fact, I'm going to tell a story now. So one of my number one investments is somebody who, I think everybody I've invested in feels like they're kind of part of my family now. Of it, like the dozen companies that are personally in my portfolio, not through the fund. This is like my family. So I'm choosing people to have a 10-year relationship with. So you don't just choose something that's profitable. But the story I wanted to tell is my number one partner, Sahil Afriya, Shipraiser is his company. Okay. It's a logistics company that's about last mile delivery, right? Not an issue in the US. In the US, the Amazon guy just throws the stuff on my porch and you get it. Well, you can't do that in Africa. So it's a whole nother idea that's very African and very developing world of how do you get the package in the person's hands once it's in Cape Town, let's say. So he's in the United States for the first time telling his story. Never been in the US, brilliant guy, growing company. And he said that his time in the US has helped him tell his story, because until he came to the US, he didn't even realize totally how you could tell the story. He could tell the details of the story, but he said the way he saw the people in San Francisco, the way you're going to get attention, you have to have a story, not just numbers. And so, that was just his observation of an African young person coming to the US and saying, oh, my business is awesome. I program computers and I get the job done. It's how I tell the story to the investors, to the press, to the government, to whoever, that is always on top of the money. That's really where the growth is and where the success lies.
Thank you, Stephen. Meanwhile, we have reactions from the audience. Thank you, Nomfundo, and also Tom. Yeah, that's a shorter version of the storytelling, but it's also very, very effective. So yeah, let's get back to our questions. My question will be neither about storytelling nor about numbers. It will be about mentorship, because Stephen, you are famous as also as a brilliant mentor, and we know that one of the top KPIs of investment success, or what we as investors look for while we're doing the due diligence, is the level of mentorship. Who has mentored those startups? Mentorship as a catalyst of success. So getting back to you, what are the best practices of implementing effective mentorship programs, in your opinion, that can accelerate the growth of young entrepreneurs in Africa? And in other words, like how can mentorship be integrated into broader capacity building efforts across the African continent?
Great question, and such an integral part of it all. So to give, all these things have to have a context. So you're a young, ambitious African. You have your university degree. You have your ambition, your energy. What you don't usually have is this network around you that might be uncles, parents, friends of the family, um, who become your informal first mentors, and often your first investors. So imagine you're in a place where people, like, let's say you want to raise $100,000 when you're in the US or Canada or Europe. You're like, okay, this person believes in me. They might give me $20,000, and okay. Well, in Africa, that's often not available. So what I saw is that I'm going to be 70 years old this year. And what I saw is the most important thing I could do in my life is put myself in situations where people don't have that resource. And so I think the story about Africa when I was young was the rich countries just give all this money to Africa, and somehow it was going to become industrialized or something. And of course, with corruption and lack of mentorship, it mostly didn't help a lot of the people. So when I think of the mentorship, I think of it in two ways: a macro way, which is, I think, is sufficient in Africa now. There's not a million, there's so many accelerators and more formal programs that are mentorship for like everybody. Okay. I think there's a lot of that, and it's happening. It's growing all the time in every major city. Certain places like Cape Town, Lagos, Nairobi are more advanced, but most African places have some place where someone can do that. What is missing is older people that, on top of money, I mean, I spend all day talking to my founders. Literally, I wake up in the morning at 6 hours ahead, and until I go to sleep, I'm just talking all day. So that's, I think, what's missing is the micro mentorship, which is, I have these 10 people whose lives I've taken into my life, and vice versa, and we're going to make this work. And I think that's what's short of is people. I could keep going, but as I've gotten involved in political things at the United Nations a few weeks ago, and I've been invited to be part of that. I think people are making big ideas, but really the mentorship is when you say, "Here's some money and call me anytime." And when you have a meeting, you could put me on the meeting also. And if you need credibility because you're 25 years old and a recent college grad, when I'm in the room, it just goes differently. And this started with investing with females, young people, Africans, you name it. It's just, I wish the world was not that way, but somebody like me standing there with Africans really makes it happen a lot faster, at least in these early stages. It's the mentorship and the mentorship includes just standing with people, like not standing in front of them to take over their thing, but being there to stand with them and let them be the leaders. I'm 70. I don't want to be the chief. I want to help these people be the leaders. And if each one of them can hire 1,000 people and some of those people create enterprises, that's the legacy that I want to leave.
Thank you, Stephen. If I can add one thing, I really loved what you said. Mentorship, how you shrunk the definition of mentorship. Here is some money and call me anytime. That's what I heard from my mom 20 years ago. So she was a mentor, and in this case, and I believe that's true. Why I love this expression of yours is because I really consider relations between startups and mentors a family relations, especially when a mentor also acts as an investor. Over to you, Olu, and
Yeah.
yes, we put the wrong name of our webinar. It should have been like this.
Exactly, the man, the myth, and the legend. Okay, we're gonna tweak it. Okay. Oh, let me first quickly acknowledge some of the guests. In the audience. I have a very good childhood friend of mine, Adebimpe Oguyemi from Florida, United States. Thank you, Bimpe, for joining. Also, Tim Son for joining. He's also the founder of Perspectives with Cancer. We have other audience participants in the room, viewing from different parts of the world. This takes me to the next question, Stephen. But before I ask that question, I just want to take a moment in time to thank you for being that voice, for being that inspiring mentor, inspiring investor, inspiring person that believes in other people's dreams, because it takes a large-hearted person to believe in somebody else's dream, not only believe in the dream, but also back that dream to the point where you support that dream for it to grow. And now we're seeing Zip Razor, one of your startups that you backed up. He's in San Francisco, and he's doing brilliantly well. And what would have happened if you hadn't given him that opportunity? And that brings me to my next
Great
question.
question. That's a great
kind
question.
of talk about, yeah. Thank you. And which brings me back to what you said about the intergenerational opportunity that is there. You're 70. I'm in my late 50s, almost knocking the door on 60, and we have these young people, young entrepreneurs from Africa who have brilliant dreams, ideas. And the question is, how do we empower the next generation? How can we strategically leverage emerging technologies first to empower African youth and women, which are your passion in the creative tech, knowing that you supported an art and creative, entrepreneur at the first beginning of your investment in Africa, and what specific capacity development initiatives are needed to ensure that they can lead the continent's digital transformation? It's always a double barrel question for me. So, Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, it's great. To take the question and then personalize it to go on to the story I just told about Sahil is like, okay, so here's somebody, a young, early 30s, just got his MBA, student loans, living in Cape Town, married, has a great job with a VC firm doing this in Africa. And yet his dream was to do his own thing. But what I had to do is invest enough money so he could leave his job. That's like the best way to tell the story is just Africans could spend their whole life dreaming about what they want to do, but to actually have someone say to them, I'm going to put my money behind you and I'm going to give you this money so that you could leave your job, start the company. And here's something that's part of Africa, part of everywhere, but I think it's more in Africa. When you're using Sahil as an example of all African young, brilliant founders, once you're successful, it's easy to get money. But it's like, who will be that mentor, that first, how to get to that first $100,000 is the hardest. Once you've raised money and you have income and they can see it's growing, the wealthier. And so even with that, when I invested personally as the first investor, allowed him to leave his job and really devote full time to this. Now, imagine a year later, our fund launch became an investor in Sahil and ShipRaiser. but they needed it to get to a certain point to put their weight behind it. And so the problem for people is getting people like me, so that before the more institutional, even by African standard investors and global investors, which is the reason Sahil is in San Francisco, is how do you get to where you don't have to go to work every day to pay the rent and pay your student loans and your car and whatever else. And so I think I give some of my people, him in particular, the freedom to do it, where it possible in the United States or Europe or Canada, you might have a family members that say, okay, here's enough money for the next year or two, go do it. And that's what isn't available in Africa. And that's the most, but not just the money, this is like my family. I mean, he's like my family. There's no, and so that's our future, if you make an investment, let's say you go to the bank and you open a 6-month CD, so you just do it, you get your interest, you do your thing. When you invest in an early stage African company, you're in a 10-year relationship or a 5-year relationship. So you want to choose differently than it just by who's going to be successful.
Yeah, I'm going to bring you back to the second part of my question, and that is, I see your hand holding. What is running through in your conversation, in your responses, is the fact that you handhold your the businesses, the startups that you invest in, which I see as an initiative, like you're building together, you're hand holding them. So can we kind of summarize to say one of the capacity development is in hand holding, is in mentorship, and is in what other strategy or initiatives do you think are out there that could be like best practices for other investors? Before Dennis, I'm sure Dennis is itching for his next question.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I think, contrary to what people might think, the actual skill sets are already there in Africa. They're already there. It's just how to plug into a global economy that is often people are not used to investing in things they're not familiar with. So, for instance, as I hold their hand, the way they tell their story, both financially and otherwise, feels more receivable from the people they're trying to talk to. Whereas everybody knows what it's like when two people are talking and they both make sense, but they're missing each other. So I think a lot of the hand holding is how to connect the dots. The content is there, but people get confused because people look differently, they sound differently, the way they have meetings is differently, the level of short personal and so in fact, my latest, which haven't announced yet, but I've been recruited into a startup called Catalyze You, and their whole thesis is there's a surplus of African educated people, right? And in the West, there's a surplus of jobs for those people at much higher salaries, and the people in Africa make lower salaries. So their whole thesis is we take those people who fit a certain mold that we think will be successful, and we train them. We don't train them how to program computers. We train them how do you do sales in the United States, let's say sales or marketing or whatever it is. And the idea is that's the way to create jobs for young educated Africans, which that's often the logjam, is that all throughout Africa, there's so many more young Africans that are educated, ambitious, and super, they're not going to give up. They're going to do it. And a lack of jobs that present those opportunities. And I think Olu would agree, that's, if you had to say it in a sentence, like that's sort of how we would describe where we are now, where some people might think there aren't those people to do it. And I'm going to say, I'm here today with the three of us to say, oh no, all those resources are there. My whole role in being alive now feels like it's to connect all those dots so that people aren't afraid of each other and develop trust.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Olu.
Yeah.
Let's get close to numbers, as we promised.
Yes.
So let's talk about investment strategies for African startups in the context of the Africa's evolving creative tech landscape. Stephen, what innovative investment strategies or known investment strategies can be employed to support startups, particularly those led by young founders and women? So, in other words, how can we ensure these investments have a long-term impact? Regarding African startups, what investment strategies do you use? Small checks, big checks, comprehensive due deal, follow-on funding, or some investment strategies invented by you? I believe every continent, every investor has something in stock.
Yeah, great question. I'll start it here to just show the importance of the topic that you've chosen. Is that when I was at the UN, every year they pick out certain topics that they use as macro ideas that we really want to focus on these 3 or 4 ideas. And so this year, one of the main topics, and it was clear throughout the event, and usually they're talking about oil and energy and digitization of the economy, which is all part of it, right? But this year, they were one of the focuses was the arts and sports, not just the thing of it, but the business. Now, this is your question. The business around the arts and sports is such a resource for Africa. But like the startups, like I don't have anything to look at. If you invest in the US, there's all kinds of Standard & Poor's and research materials and stuff. You know what? Me and my partners are the research materials. Like nobody knows more than we do because we're the ones doing it. So I think that's one of the main differences is information. You can't have a market without information being public. And so as we make these investments over longer periods of time and people see track records, there's more data to support it. I would say that that's part of our mission now would be to take these gems, the arts, let's use the arts, and no question about the quality of the art, but how do you put it into a global market with money and shows and prices and how artists live and how they develop? And so I think that's where the focus is. You could make some big thing, but it has to be people investing. And so, like I said, because you can't get a pension fund to invest in something like this because there's no AAA ratings for this. And so again, once it's matured to a certain point, whether it be art, it's easy, but it's like, how do you get it so people don't see it as just some super risky, some investment that 3 years from now that people are going to say, what is that? How is it going to be that 3 years from now, it's a maturing market, not a hit and miss market? And I think that's what we're all trying to do now. So it would be people seeing over time artists develop and get the attention of the West, because often that's, that kind of attention is the money and all that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen.
Stephen. Okay. So I'm going to bring you into a recent event talking about a topic. The next question is going to hover around the role of policy in the ecosystem development. And I want you to share your thoughts on how African governments can create enabling environments that support the growth of the creative tech startup ecosystem, or the startup ecosystem, in general. What specific policies, regulatory frameworks are needed to encourage innovation and attract investment? And I want you to bring in your experience with the Global Africa Business Initiative, where you've been a participant and a voice last year and this year in New York. Thank you, Stephen.
Great question. Right. So at the events in New York, the UN that I just attended, I think there were 7 African presidents, to give you an idea of who was there. So I think there were 7 African presidents, diplomats, and all that. So it was interesting, because these are the people that make the policies. Okay. Now, one of the presidents that was there was the president of Botswana, which is a not so poor country. But I have a young person in Botswana who called me a few years ago, Muketsi Moralang, and he said, listen, I have a college degree. My whole generation is super educated, because Botswana is not a poor country. None of us are starving, but we're in our 20s and we want to do stuff, and the government is rich. And what they do is they have so much money hoarded. I've been kind of lobbying with these young founders in different countries. I have Wiwa in Zambia. The idea that, imagine countries in Africa, especially ones that have diamonds and gold, and have huge dollar reserves, right? Like $1 billion. What if you took 5% of that and said, I'm going to invest in the young people of my country to give them things to get started, whether it be a stipend for a year, whether it be computers, whether it be a place to work, whether it be an introduction to me. And so I think the reality is, in Africa, more than other places, but everywhere on the globe, nothing happens without the government being behind it. It's like you're swimming against the waves. It's much nicer. So I think, theoretically, in like Botswana and in other places, when we say it, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But getting governments to change their habits is very different. And when there's so many levels of bureaucracy in Africa, it's often somebody's like, yes, we're going to do that initiative, Stephen and Muketsi, that's great. And then somewhere between that and the president, somebody's interests are other than that, are more personal. And so that's really, along with the money, along with the taking people under my wings, this question as I go into this, I'm about 5 years in, is I want to be connected to the leaders of African countries, because I feel like what we're doing is good for them. These are their constituents that we want to make happy. And so governments have to loosen up a little. And often the older people are the people controlling the governments, like in Botswana, and the younger people, they don't want to, they're not saying change everything. They're just saying, give us a little piece of the pie, because we're not going to always have diamonds and gold. And it's like, in a sense, to recreate what's happened in the Middle East. The countries in the Middle East that had oil, maybe 10 years ago, they said, we got to take all this money and create other things, other kinds of startups, because 100 years from now, 50 years from now, maybe there's not going to be oil. And I think that's what the thing in Africa would be to the countries that have gathered surpluses from minerals, from other things, to start investing in other companies, which is their youth. The number one resource isn't the diamonds and gold, it's the youth.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Steve.
Here's one last thing.
And Dennis, you have.
I wouldn't see myself. I'm going to say one more thing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even see myself as being in those conversations, But I feel like the young Africans are saying to me, they'll listen to you, not me, even though I'm in their country. You're an older guy, you're successful. The heads of my country, hearing it from you makes they're going to listen to, even though I wish they heard it from my young African. But together we have a better chance of government opening up
Yeah.
to this.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we're going to just take a moment to acknowledge our audience and their messages. This is so brilliant. Dr. Dennis, not my Dennis in the house, Dr. Dennis Bediagin, I please do apologize. He says, good morning, good evening, everybody. Thanks for another great webinar. My question, Burning Man in the US is a great gathering of artists, entrepreneurs and VCs where art and tech go hand in hand and connections are forged to follow up businesses. Now there's a regional version of Burning Man called africaburn.org. Is there a chance for this event to become the center of gravity for Pan-African art and tech ecosystems? Or is it too far from African continent realities? Who wants to take that question? Stephen?
It's a great question, and it really fits into this whole conversation that it's how do you make that bridge? Olu and I have talked many times of like, we have to be the bridge who understand both cultures. So there's people that understand Africa better than me, and there's people that understand United States better than me. But people like Olu and myself, we understand both worlds, and that's really what's necessary. So for something like this, this is how I'm seeing it. Okay, great question. One thing would be that Africa has so many different countries that have different cultures. Some of them have different languages. So you have French Africa, English Africa. Each country has different political realities in terms of how open the arts are and politically in that. So my answer would be yes, that's a possibility somewhere in the future. My experience is that these things are growing in national ways. Like you can't start from nowhere and then just have all of Africa commune on the art. So it starts out, for instance, I met I call him my little brother, my Raul in Kigali, Rwanda. Okay. Raul is a promoter of the arts. He's about 6'8", and he's like in his 20s. So he we're like, I'm his big brother because I'm older, but he's a lot taller than me. Anyway, his whole thing is about the arts. So he's got the government behind it. So imagine coming out of a genocide, a Holocaust, the role the arts play in as culture goes from war to survival to this younger generation saying, we don't just want to survive, we want to have a beautiful world that has the arts in it. And so my answer to the question is, I think these things will grow in different countries that then could become some, Africa Burning Man kind of thing. And at first, each country will start to have its festival. Like I was invited to speak at the first arts festival in Kigali. I wasn't able to go. It was a couple of years ago. But when you're coming out of genocide, the idea to create arts as being valuable and have life be about joy, not just survival, is such a part of the younger generation in Africa. As when we talk about the arts and commerce, the other part we haven't quite mentioned is being the youngest place on the planet. There's the most people going into the middle class in Africa. It doesn't take long to walk the streets of any African city and say, see, this is the generation that's going into the middle class, that's techie, that's educated. Yeah. And so this is where the growth is with Africans. So I'll stop there.
It's a yes then. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Dennis, over to you. Thank you, yes, Stephen.
Let's just put on the screen several of numerous
questions,
comments we're receiving today, and of course, we're giving the chance everyone to showcase his own initiative and startup as soon as it helps young Africans and African startups to evolve. So,
I'm
Steven,
going to
it's
say
for your
there are so
attention.
many other, like to the question that's up there. There are so many people independently, doing things, different and similar to what I'm doing. And I think the strength is in the reason we're doing this to the purpose of the question is to hook up together, because it is our strength is like when I met Olu, like we said, separately we're both pretty formidable people, but together we're much stronger. So in terms of other people
We're
doing
powerhouse.
mentoring and doing investing, it's I don't do anything in Africa alone. It's just not like that. So I'm very open. I think all my partners are, and in everything I do, I have like different partners in every deal. So that's why it's great to know everybody, because when something comes up, I think the biggest thing I do is figure out who else do I know that I want to participate in this project. And I think to the question, it's like rather than have it's great that everybody's doing these things separately. And at certain times we have to pull together, because it is together that, say, governments will listen to us more,
collaborate,
or bigger investors, or that. So great question.
Yes. I'm also happy that the representatives of Web3 community, like James from Kurkuma, and he's also an ambassador of Polkadot blockchain. So Web3 community is listening to us, and it gives hope that African creative tech will be supported by high-end technologies right now, even not tomorrow, but right now. And thank you, Raul, for quite emotional, but the comment.
That's who I was just talking to. That's great. I was talking about Raul and Kigali, and
exactly. Exactly. And we have another from Stories Wawike, very interesting and informative. Thank you, Stories. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have Rod. Thank you for the invitation. And the sisters, you're a true example of leadership, Stephen. Oh, don't we just know that, Stephen? And Bridge. Okay, this is building relationships, inclusion, diversity, growth, and excellence. Rod L. Thank you for participating. Thank you for taking time to join us on this webinar.
Hey, Rod.
Thank you so much. Okay. So
one thing I was just going to say along these lines, as everybody's saying,
the next question.
Feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. That would be a way to continue this conversation and all of our connections.
To continue the conversation. Exactly.
We'd love to learn about all the initiatives everybody in the audience is doing also, because I'm sure we could team up somewhere along the way.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Olu. Saying that in the investment way, I mean, speaking investment language, we're close to exit of our webinar as a startup.
Yes.
So let's combine the most important question, the final question, and the summary into one. I'll try to do that. When we speak about the future, many startups consider scaling as their future, as their strategy, as the way they evolve. So scaling African innovation globally. Stephen, what strategies, in your opinion, should be employed to ensure that African creative tech startups can scale their innovation on a global level? And at the same time, how can and why should the international market access the investment to support this growth?
Great. That's a great question and a great final question. Like everything else, I think it's like time. I was thinking when I first started investing in Africa, and I first started investing in female founders, when I first said it to people, they were just like, they couldn't even imagine what it was that I was like, that why, like it was, they couldn't quite imagine it, those things. Like, why would you invest in female founders or in Africa? Okay. Now let's go ahead 5-10 years. I think we're in that sweet spot that people would be open. One of the things I say, this would apply to art and it applies to all tech startups, is my thesis isn't saying to somebody in the US or Europe or Canada, take all your money and invest it in Africa. What I am saying is Africa is the future. There's no question about it. I could go through all the statistics, but I'd rather tell the stories. But the idea would be, why wouldn't you take 5 or 10% of your assets and say, okay, this is for the future. I might make 10 times my money and I might lose it, but for a small part, this is the future. The same way people invest in real estate and they invest in gold and they invest in the stock market. I think Africa, the arts and Africa in general, can scale as people, both fund managers in the US, governments, and there's opinion leaders like myself. When you start to say it and people start to say, why don't you send me your few best companies? I'd like to, since you already know things, I'd like to get involved, And so I think we're at that point where people shouldn't just throw money at nothing, but there are people to get behind. So like, for instance, like once people like myself have become the first investor and I'm going to hold their hand, then it's a less risky thing to do, and so things like that to find, I think as the vanguard of African investors and telling the story, it has to be how to get those first group of people to say, this is awesome. I'm investing in Africa and women in Africa and young people, and listen to this, and not only make money, but feel like they're doing something.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
The best reply to you is are still the comments from our audience. Thank you, John. James.
Hello.
Yes, that proves that
this
the
is a weird thing. I get 100 calls a month.
The transaction time of Polkadot blockchain is still one of the shortest and high speed. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, we'll be looking forward to be connected with your Polkadot colleague in Nigeria and provide them all the information and connection with all of Stephen
in Nigeria.
Our initiative.
Rihanna. Another one.
We also have Rihanna.
There's so many people who are my partners one way or another. So I've invested in Rihanna's company. So, there's just.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Absolutely mind-blowing and inspiring to see them show up for you. Tells a lot, goes a long way to how much you have put in them, invested in them, handheld them to where they are today, and to tell them that you're with them on the long haul of their journey as founders. Dennis, do you want to take away and let's wrap?
I just wanted to thanks Stephen from my side. All will do the same. And I just want to remind our audience that this webinar series is designed to be a cornerstone of the Africa Creative Tech Initiative by Fuel Arts and Story Chest, that with the aim to provide young African entrepreneurs and creatives the tools, inspirations, and connections needed to succeed in our rapidly evolving global landscape, Web 2, Web 3, whatever, human, first of all. So please join us next time as we embark on this journey to empower Africa's next generation of leaders in the creative and technology industries. Over to you, Olu.
Yeah, I just want to quick take what Stephen's last words would be to our audience. What would be your last word? Very short and, straight to the point.
First, I want to just thank Olu and Dennis for inviting me and everybody for being here this morning. It was 8 a.m. here where I am, so thank you. I think just the idea that, this is a lifetime commitment. Like sometimes people do things, and they're just like some flash in the pan. Like this Africa story is going to be the story of the next 50 years, 100 years. But our job is to put it here today. And so everybody who wants to join me, whether it's founders, investors, the press, the government, the universities, if one thing I would say, and I think we would all agree, is that more than anywhere else, the collaboration is part of our success in Africa. That I can't do it alone. Olu can't do it alone.
Yeah.
And so
Thank you.
I hope
Yeah.
today is a beginning
Yes.
of people coming together. And, you know, each situation
Well,
requires a
yeah.
different way I shuffle the cards. All the people who called tonight, I'm involved with each one of them in different ways. And so tomorrow an opportunity will come, and maybe somebody we met today
Yes.
will be part of the next project. So thank you all. And just to believe in, I'm not
Thank
going to
you.
give up. I'm not going
Thank
to give
you.
up. So don't you give up.
There is nothing to give up
Exactly.
with
Oh,
having
thank you
such a
for
great
that.
number of
Exactly.
creative entrepreneurs in Africa, and possibilities and opportunities,
Yeah.
thanks
Yes.
to the efforts
Yeah.
of Olu and Stephen, for instance, and our great
Thank
audience.
you. Thank you,
So thank you,
Stephen.
everyone.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Stephen, for being. Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for being the great storyteller that you are. Inspiring. You're inspiring us. You you have taken us to the next level with your story, and thank you also for honoring our our invitation. And what a remarkable journey to today, our viewers, our audience. The insights shared, the stories told, the vision for Africa's future that we have explored have all been nothing short of inspiring. As we wrap up this dynamic conversation, I want to take a moment to reflect on the takeaways and the highlights. And that's part of what we're leaving with you. That one, investing in Africa is simply not a financial decision, but one that harnesses the power of creativity, entrepreneurship, and what Stephen said, collaboration to build a resilient future. Two, from mentorship to youth empowerment to unlocking the potential of women founders. The future of Africa is a story of impact, is a story of transformation, and of course, of bold leadership. We have seen that exemplified by what Stephen is doing across the continent. And three or four, emerging technologies are not just reshaping Africa's creative and tech landscape, but they're fueling innovation across every sector. Visionary leadership, like Stephen, like every other visionary leadership there on the continent, in the global north and global south, can ignite waves of change across the continent, leveraging not just capital, but passion. We've seen passion today in Stephen. We've seen purpose in Stephen. Our guest's unwavering commitment to backing African startups and his ambition. He has a bold ambition to scale that investment is proof of what's possible when belief in Africa's potential meet action. He has reminded us today that that is not just a business, it's about legacy. He said legacy. He's 70 years old. He's still involved in entrepreneurs, in startups that are they're in 20s, they're in their 30s. It's about leaving footprints that drive real sustainable growth. So whether you're an investor, a policymaker, an entrepreneur, or innovator, this is your call to action. Now is the time to get involved. Let's come together. Let's collaborate with Africa Creative Tech Initiative, with Stephen. We're the powerhouse. I always say in our conversation, we are the powerhouse to collaborate, to invest, and shape the future of this vibrant continent. In closing, let me remind us that the conversation doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. There's so much ahead, and we have the power to keep pushing boundaries, to disrupt the status quo and drive real change. Africa is rising, and it's time to be part of that story. Together, we can ignite that change. We look forward to seeing you at our next session as we continue to push the boundaries, share stories, and create a future where innovation and creativity lead the way. Thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olu. Thank you, Stephen, for being exact as Microsoft Excel, transparent with us as a blockchain, and creative as African continent is creative. Thank you, and see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.